Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to start by a repudiation of Pascal's wager by the great theologian Homer Simpson, who, when Marge was trying to get him to go to Mass, replied, "But what if we picked the wrong God? Every week we're just making God madder and madder." But what I want to focus on tonight is the idea that there's various different ideas of God. And I'm going to suggest that the idea of God as an intervening supernatural person is false, and that the idea of God as a moral guide is false. And I'm going to suggest that there are two other ideas of God: as a personal commitment to unconditional love and goodness, and as an impersonal force. And I'm going to suggest that both of those ideas are actually quite different types of idea that need to be disentangled from the false ideas I've mentioned earlier. So let's start with the idea of God as a supernatural, personal, intervening being. And I'm including within that all of the claims that are usually attributed to God in this context, from creating the world out of nothing, to impregnating a virgin in order to give birth to himself, to answering or not answering, depending on how the mood takes him, millions of prayers every day, to turning pieces of bread and volumes of wine into his own body and blood every time a validly ordained priest of the human species on the planet Earth chooses to articulate a certain set of words. And all of these ideas exist in the same intellectual realm as magic and superstition and witchcraft and sorcery. Just about a year ago, the Pope announced a special time-limited promotional offer that if you visited Lourdes in France during 2008, but not afterwards, you would get a free plenary indulgence that would get you time off from a place called Purgatory after you die, and would then enable you to get into another place called Heaven faster after you die. Now, in any other field, we would immediately recognise that claims like this, particularly, let us note, claims made to sick and vulnerable people, are fraudulent claims. And I'm suggesting that we should apply the exact same criteria to fraudulent claims about gods. This brings me on to the idea of God as a moral guide, which is also a false idea, particularly as articulated through his alleged words in books like the Bible and the Quran. Let's examine what happens when we read those books. We read passages that suggest that it's a good idea to love your neighbour as yourself, or to be kind and forgiving, or we read the story of the Good Samaritan and we say to ourselves, yes, those are morally good ideas. And then we read other passages where it is suggested that it is a good thing to stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, or to stone a woman to death for not being a virgin on her wedding night, or to kill Babylonian infants by dashing them against rocks. And we say to ourselves, no, these are bad moral ideas. Now let's examine what's happening here. We are applying our own morality to the passages that we're reading in these books, not the other way around. The most we can use these words for, if we want to, is to selectively vindicate our already existing beliefs about right and wrong, but not to get our ideas about right and wrong. This brings me on to the third idea of God that I want to look at, which is the idea of God as a personal commitment to unconditional love and goodness and ultimate reality, whatever that may be. And this has come to the fore in religious circles, partly because science has weakened the idea of God as a personal, intervening, supernatural being. And secular democracy has weakened the idea of God as a moral guide and lawmaker. And so religion is increasingly forced back on the idea that God is a personal commitment. And it's dressed up as a commitment to these values, which would be a good thing if that's what it was. It's a very useful idea to have a personal commitment to unconditional love and to goodness and to seek the truth about ultimate reality. It helps people to have a sense of personal meaning and encourages people to be kind to one another. But within religion, that noble aim is inextricably entangled with the two false ideas of God that I've outlined earlier. And so in order to manifest your commitment to unconditional love and goodness within the context of God, you have to reconcile it with the creation myths and the underdeveloped morality of Bronze Age and Iron Age tribes. And that leads us to a situation where, most recently, Mother Teresa was revealed or was outed as the world's most famous closet atheist, where we now know that she spent most of her life in inner torment because she did not believe in God. And she fervently believed that she had to believe in God in order to manifest her personal commitment to unconditional love and goodness. And her religious superiors could only advise her that she should give this spiritual dryness as a gift, a special gift to God, when they could and should have been able to say to her, you know the way we understand now that all these stories about Adam and Eve and the talking snake and the flood and the burning bush, you know the way we know they're all metaphors? Well, so is God. God is just a metaphor. He doesn't really exist. But they can't say that to her because they're tied up in the idea that the Word of God has been set in stone by Bronze Age and Iron Age men. Finally, I want to look at the idea of God as an impersonal force. And that can either be just a sense that there are things there that we don't yet understand, to the idea that the laws of nature themselves and the universe are God. Now, this idea is pretty uncontroversial, but it needs to be disentangled from the idea of God as a personal being, simply for the sake of clarity and accuracy, because it is such a different idea. About 9 in 10 Americans and Europeans say they believe in God. But if you go beneath that question, only about 2/3 of Americans and just over half of Europeans believe in a personal God. And they are such different concepts that I believe that the idea of an impersonal force should not be labelled with the same name as the idea of the personal, supernatural, intervening deity. I want to close by stressing that I am not suggesting that everybody who believes these false ideas of God are themselves fraudulent. There can be no doubt that there have been deliberate fraudulent changes made in the Bible over the centuries. In fact, in religious circles there's even a word for that, which is pious fraud. But most of the time, false ideas about God are spread in the same way that pyramid schemes spread. It's innocent people unwittingly conveying false ideas to other innocent people. But underneath that, I suggest that if you make claims about the nature of reality, particularly if you make unlikely claims about the nature of reality, and if you encourage people to change their behaviour based on those claims, and particularly if you encourage people to change their lives based on those claims, then you take upon yourself the onus of proof that those claims can deliver what they promise. Because otherwise, those claims about God are fraudulent. And so I second the motion. Thank you.